Well, good morning. Welcome back to the broadcast, Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Tuesday, October 26th, 2021. And our top story today, student loan debt, helping parents learn from today's student debt crisis. Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Mary Morris. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Virginia 529. Mary, it's great to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
It's good to be with you once again.
Yeah, it's great. And we're going to talk about student loan debt. It is compounding. It is growing at a rate far beyond credit card debt. But let's talk about some of the college affordability traps that a lot of families are getting caught up in. What are some of those affordability traps?
I think sometimes they just don't think about all the different ways that they can make college more affordable. Thinking about starting with community college, for example, starting by living at home and saving some of those expenses, looking for the least expensive schools, not assuming that you won't qualify for federal financial aid. I think a lot of sort of middle income or upper middle income families believe that they don't have any opportunities for financial aid, and they might. And there are some differences between, public schools and private schools. I think often individuals think, oh, the public school must be the least expensive option, when in fact sometimes there's more financial aid at a private school. So they just need to do their homework and really think about what works. And they need to start earlier than most families do. So that's another trap. Don't wait until junior or senior year to think about what might be affordable. Of course, you should start really early and save in a 529 account, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. But I want to ask you, one of the traps, and is getting caught up in the prestige of a school, and rather than suitability. And look, we all like name brands. I like my Nike shoes or my New Balance shoes. I like wearing my Paul Stewart suits, whatever. Prestige is one thing, but you really have to put that in perspective.
Absolutely. Frank Bruni wrote a great book on that. I cannot remember the exact title of it, but it'll come to me while we're talking probably. And he makes a great case for that you can get a wonderful education in any number of places. Small schools, big schools, private schools, public schools. You can get started at community college and get those, sort of the gut courses, the intro courses. Probably a savings of a third to a half in some states, the cost of community college versus a four-year degree. And honestly, no one cares where you started. They maybe care about where you finished. So although even that really doesn't persist very long, the key is to find the right fit for each student. And, wanting to go to a large public university, that might not be a good fit for you. If you start at a smaller school or closer to home, and you just think about things like that. If you've got an 18-year-old that's never lived away from home, going all the way across country, they might be perfectly ready for it. That might be the best thing for them. Other students aren't going to be ready for that. So you need to know yourself. You need to know your kids. You need to know where you are on that spectrum and figure out what's best for you. But the big ticket schools, the big name schools will not necessarily give you a better education. You also want to think about what you want to do when you graduate, right? Don't take on a lot of debt. Don't go to a more expensive school necessarily if you know that you want to work in a profession or in a job that isn't going to pay you enough to pay back the loans, if that's what you end up taking on. I think that's really where the student debt comes from, or the problem comes from sometimes. People have unrealistic expectations. They might go to an expensive private school and they want to be a school teacher, which is great. We need more of them, but it is not the highest paying job in the country. And so you need to think about that. What's going to be realistic to be able to pay back if you haven't been able to save for it?
Mary, you mentioned having the talk. And by having the talk, I mean having the talk about college. How early is too early? How late is too late?
Sure, as early as possible. There are tools in different places. We have tools under our Smart Savers accounts that families can start planning really when they're very young, even before they're in school, the family can start planning. But as kids are going through, hopefully they're getting some financial education. They're getting financially appropriate lessons, even starting in elementary school. And that's not too early to start talking about it. We work with a program called Junior Achievement. Jumpstart's another one. There are several programs like that start with early childhood education. And they talk about wants versus needs, right? And resources and limited resources. And so all of those are simple lessons, but you can start teaching kids about, what do you need for a good education? What do you need to do the job that you want to do versus what you might like to do? The student might tell you, oh, I want to go to school and not picking on Florida, but I want to go to University of South Florida because I want to live in South Florida. That might not be the best fit. And if you're not a Florida resident, then that could be a very expensive option. If you're a Florida resident, it's probably very feasible because Florida schools for in-state residents are quite inexpensive on a relative basis. So you have to think about all of those things. So it's a constant. It's having that discussion. It's having families not being afraid to talk about what is realistic and say, so we always suggest having, like I said, a 529 account or some kind of savings dedicated for higher education. The message in that to a child is this is important. Education's important. And as a family, we're going to work on this. So maybe you work in the summers as they become teenagers, and we're going to ask you to put a little bit of your money into your 529 account. You can see what we've funded it with. Show them the balances and look how it can grow. Look at, if it's invested in something that may have some volatility, sometimes it goes down. That's not a bad lesson to learn, to start learning about how you manage that. And often, it's the parents that need the education as well. So, and I've seen that before when we've been to different events. I used to go to the state fair, and some kids would come up with their parents, and the parents didn't really want to talk to us. They're like, that's not for me. And the kids would look at them and say, I'm going to go to college. Do you understand that? And so it was uncomfortable. Sometimes I'd be listening to that, but it's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's one that families need to have. So it can start from either side and then start thinking about what's realistic. What can your family afford? And that's going to be different for each one. What are your priorities and how do you make it work?
Mary, it seems, you talk about starting this process, and to me, listening to you talk, it comes down to communication and transparency. Those seem to be, I guess, in any relationship, those are probably the most important factors.
That and setting priorities, right? What are your priorities? And again, is it that big school experience? Do you want that bigger campus? Do you want urban? Do you want rural? Do you want a small school? What's important to you, and then figure out what makes sense. The one thing that I'll say that I think is maybe the most important message is to make sure that the student's ready to go to college. Make sure that they're ready for that experience, because the one thing that we know about the cost and the issue of student debt is that the students with the biggest problem, biggest challenge in repaying, the majority of those that are in default are students who haven't completed. So they've taken on some student debt, but they didn't finish their degree program, their community college program, their certificate program. And so they haven't gotten the skills. They may not get the job that will allow them to pay that debt back, but they have debt. And they may not have fully realized what they were undertaking and how fast they'd have to start paying it back once they stopped attending. And so that creates a real problem. The average debt right now, I think, for someone graduating with a 4-year degree is about $30,000, which can be manageable, right? That's not out of reason. That's not even, a top of the line car. That's a car that a young adult might want to acquire and have to pay for. So that's manageable. But for some lower income students, for some ones that maybe don't have as much family assistance, their parents didn't go to school, they don't have the resources to really deal with this because they don't have the background and the experience, they don't have the financial education, they don't complete the degree. It's really less than 10,000. Students with less than 10,000 in student debt are the ones that are really struggling. And we hear all the horror stories about six-figure debt. That can be really challenging. Some do take that on, but in most instances, those are students that have taken on graduate school debt. And so again, they at least have a better likelihood, if they're completing graduate school, of being able to pay that debt back. So it's really important, I think, as a country, as we think about the student debt issue, to think about really where the true problems are and how we can try to solve that.
Well, Mary, I need to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about managing your family finances and avoiding student loan debt. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you over 50? Would you like to get up to 33% more income in retirement? Then call now for this free book, Annuity Do's and Don'ts for Baby Boomers. This free book reveals little-known secrets about annuity strategies that will help you make the right choices before buying an annuity. Call right now for your free book, and as a bonus, we'll also throw in a free annuity rate report, both absolutely free for calling Annuity General today.
Call 800-504-8194.
Welcome back. We're talking this morning to Mary Morris. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Virginia 529. Mary, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm a talker. You've already figured that out. So I'm happy to have a chance to chat with you.
This is amazing, and this is such great information born from so many lessons from the Virginia 529 plan. Let's talk about figuring out the cost and figuring out the process. What do parents need to be thinking about? You talked about starting the process. You talked about why it's important, but how do what do families need to think about?
Well, you need to think about really what works for you. So again, a family that's thought about it for a long time, hopefully has started putting money aside. We think, I work with the 529 program, so I think that a 529 program is the best way that you can save for college, but there are other ways. But really, it's getting into that habit of saving, something that this country is not great at, but we've gotten better during the pandemic, so hopefully some of those lessons will persist. One of the things we've seen here recently with the advanced child tax credits that are being paid, that a lot of families are taking some part of that and putting it into their 529 account. They're saying this is unexpected. We have expenses, but maybe we've been able to cut back on some of our travel and things like that. So we're doing okay. We're going to put this aside because that may change. And so they're putting some of that money into a 529 account for the future, which we think is brilliant. Whenever you have some resources to do that, a little bit over a long period of time makes a difference. So if you've done that, that's great. And then again, you start thinking about what makes sense. Not all debt is bad. I think we used to say, if you can look at it, if you can cover a third of the costs of your child or yourself, getting some post-secondary education, if you can cover a third with current income, a third with savings and a third with debt, that's not a bad rule of thumb. Again, the amount of the debt depends on where you're going to go. We've talked about that, making a good choice. But you have to think about it. If you can burn expenses, you're covering room and board for the kids anyway, right? So you have to cover that in one way or another. So that can maybe be that just current income. As much as you can save, it just makes it easier. Maybe your child doesn't need to work as much over the summer. It doesn't need to think about, getting work study. You can also, again, look into always complete the FAFSA. Every family should complete the free application for student assistance or student aid, I think is what it's called. Because again, most schools will require that even to get merit-based aid. So, you may have a really sharp student, one who has the grades and has the test scores that they might get some aid. They're still going to have to complete the FAFSA. So don't forget that step. It's really important. And as I said, families with even pretty substantial income, particularly if they have more than one student in college at the same time, can qualify for need-based aid more than you would think. So really think about it. The schools might have some aid that don't just come under the federal Pell Grant requirements. So think about that. Think about what you can do. Think about work study programs. Look at all the different resources. We participate in a number of scholarship programs. I've had friends that run some of those. Look for all the scholarships. There's some really quirky scholarships. A million years ago, I worked with some folks that were affiliated with Valparaiso University in Indiana. They have a great dance program, and they had dance scholarships for students who came from a particular state or place or whatever. So, you might be the only person that's applying for it. So look for all those sources of financial aid and ways to help. If you have a 529 account, ask for gifts. Do not be shy about that. Again, we talked about the conversations, having a conversation with your kids and the parents about what's realistic and planning and saving. Talk to friends and family. There's absolutely nothing wrong. We think it's brilliant to say, hey, want my kid to go to college. They're whatever age they are now. We have birthdays coming up. We have graduation from kindergarten. We have graduation from middle school. We have high school graduation. We have sweet 16 parties. You have Christmas. You have bar mitzvahs. You have, whatever it is, 529 day. Encourage friends and family to make a contribution to your 529 account instead of or as a part of their gift. Give a small tangible gift and put some money into the 529 account. So there are ways to grow money, to have those resources and then see where you are. And when you get into high school and you start thinking about what have we been able to do, what's realistic, and then start making your choices and really narrowing it down.
Mary, listening to you talk, is it, and you mentioned the 529, you mentioned gifts. Is it possible for a family not to accrue student loan debt? Absolutely.
Again, I hate to beat a dead horse here, but in Virginia, we have 23 community colleges. I think no community college is more than 50 miles from anyone that lives in the state of Virginia. And that is such a wise way to get started, I think. For a student that doesn't know what they want to do, that's a great way to start. It's much, much less expensive. Virginia has relatively expensive community colleges, and it's still, you can say, about a third of the cost of going to any other public university. Again, in Virginia, the public universities, the range of costs is quite steep. So look for one of the less expensive schools and think, maybe that's a great fit for you. It really is possible to do that. And again, the other thing to think about for students is even a 2-year program, what's right for that student at that time. We talk a lot in Virginia now about pathways to the future, pathways to education. That can be a certificate program. That can be some kind of a training program. There are 6-month, there are 1-year programs, things that really get you started, can give you some basic skills to allow you to get a job, to get started. And for some students, that's what they're ready for when they're 18 or 19. I'm not saying to defer it forever. And then once they've worked for a while, they might say, I think I want to go back and get some additional education. So again, think about what works for your student. If they are ready, then they can pop right into a program. Again, encourage taking 15 credit hours. I think that's a way. I think that's a trap that a lot of families fall into. Their students, and I think a lot of schools recommend this. They say take 12 hours for your first year. Well, that's fine, but you're 6 credit hours behind if you do that. So if you take 12 credit hours your first semester, maybe think about getting some credits during summer school. You can take them online, perhaps. You can take those at a local community college, make sure they'll transfer, make sure that your school will accept them. But again, that's a way to maybe get some less expensive credits, stay on track. But in most schools, you need 15 credits per semester for 4 years to be able to graduate on time. And I've seen that happen a lot. There's a group called Complete College America. And one of their big things is, full-time is 15. So that's something, because the longer you take, if you take 5 years, you just made it more expensive to go. So try to finish in 4 years, try to go full time if you're really going to be able to go full time. So again, a lot of things like that. Look for deals, look for those scholarships. You put everything together. It's a package. It takes some work. It takes some research. And again, I would put that on the kids. The students should be able to do that. They need to want to go, right? They need to want to have that education. And it doesn't really work without that. So if the family's been having conversations showing the value of education, the value of hard work over a long period of time, it's more likely that that lesson will take and that the students will be ready to go on to college when the time comes.
Absolutely. And it's a maturation process that we all go through. Some of us mature sooner than others. I was a late bloomer. My wife would argue that I'm still a late bloomer. Mary Morris, we've got to leave it there. Really appreciate you coming on the program, and we look forward to having you back on again very soon. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
That wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest that somebody you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited, and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.